Hi, and welcome to New God Sunday School. I'm Tom Scioli, author of Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics, and I Am Stan, a graphic biography of the legendary Stan Lee. There's a pre-order link in the show notes below where you can pre-order I Am Stan, and at that same link you can also pre-order the softcover version of Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics. So today we're talking about Mr. Miracle number 5, which is the first story that Mike Royer does the inking on. This was, Mike Royer's big tryout, and this is also the one where Jack Kirby got, very upset with Mike and told him to never, ever, ever change the faces. Don't touch the faces, because as you'll see, Artist Edition, Mike Royer did, alter Big Barta's face. And, as the story goes, once Jack kind of gave him a hard time about that, he put, the fear of God into him to such a degree that, he never changed another thing. He became incredibly faithful and rarely, made any kind of alterations to the artwork, at least for a little while, until he sort of relaxed into the job and started feeling a little more comfortable to, make little tweaks here and there. This is a really fun issue, and just like the previous episode, when Mike Royer shows up, it feels like things sort of ratchet up to 11, and the whole series, New Gods, Mr. Miracle, and Forever People all just really gel. And it just gets elevated. The stories get better, the visuals get better. It just the inks allow it to take on a visual identity that is unlike anything that has ever come before. Cemented what the Jack Kirby aesthetic is, and mind blowing and as fresh today as it was back in the 70s. It's Kirby like you've never seen him before. It's like a diabolical car wash. It traps you on the way in and kills you on the way out. It's mechanized murder. Mr. Miracle, super escape artist. Enjoy your trip on Dr. Vundabar's murder machine. Also, big, beautiful, dangerous, Big Barta. This cover art, Neil Adams was given the task of, doing some touch up on it. It's, mostly Kirby's stuff, but Kirby had sort of these, abstract looking things attacking Mr. Miracle. And so editorial at DC wanted Neil Adams to sort of change them into more sort of recognizable things. So I think this was like kind of abstract, and he turned it into a knife. And this was more abstract, and he turned it into an A-bomb of all things, which is, pretty cool. But let's get into the interior story. So a really great shot of Big Barta. And you can see in the artist edition, there's a little note on the border from Jack that says, "Colorist, please leave sky area white. Will give the page a poster-like quality." And that's one of the things, when Kirby was finally in charge of the inking, because when Vince Colletta was inking this stuff, he was inking it in New York, and Jack was in California. But when Mike Royer was inking it, he was in California, just like Jack, and so Jack was able to sort of oversee it and give him feedback and instructions in a way that was much easier and more natural than with Vinny's inking. So one of the instructions Jack gave him was Jack felt that the coloring that his work was getting at DC was too heavy-handed, too dark, and so he requested that Mike Royer provide like as many borderless panels as possible, just to get more white into the compositions, into the pages, just so they weren't quite so heavy. So yeah, you can see if you look closely at the faces, they're different. And so what happened was Royer inked Big Barta, and he embellished Big Barta's face, and he said he was trying to make her look more like Cher. And Jack didn't want her to look like anyone except what he had drawn, what he had put down on the page. And so what he did is he cut the photo stats of these pages. And so he cut the photo stat of the original face that he drew and pasted it on top of this Cher face. And then had Royer ink that photostat to kind of, fill it in a little bit. And then that was, what was printed. And I guess whoever, bought this page, either that photostat had, fallen off, or maybe the owner, peeled it off to see the actual like inked art underneath. But so we have a record of Royer's alteration, but then we also have, Jack's original drawing is what sees print. And you can also see it in this face on this page. You can see the Kirby version of the face, and then the Royer version of the face. Scott Free is receiving a shipment from this delivery service of this old Civil War era cannon, to be used as a trap, as a prop in his escape artist act. Now, this whole series, we continually see Scott Free, testing, rehearsing, and preparing for his stage show. But in the 18 issues, we never get to actually see him see an actual performance. We only see the rehearsals, which, maybe that was the plan all along, and it's sort of like, oh, we're doing like a behind the scenes kind of thing, and the actual show is off camera. Or maybe, Kirby was planning to build towards that, maybe as some kind of grand finale or something, but we just never got there. These delivery guys are kind of leering at Barta and making smarmy comments to her. So she gets sort of fed up, pushes them out of the way, and shows them, how it's done. And she lifts the cannon. And where I come from, you grunts would really be taught how to throw your back into a job. And so she carries it off. And now we cut to the villain of the issue, Vermin Vundabar, and he's testing a destruction machine, a trap that he has planned for Mr. Miracle. He's testing it on a Mr. Miracle doll. Now, I'm a little bit surprised. Usually when Kirby does this kind of thing of somebody testing out, a way to like kill a superhero, usually he does it in a way where you actually think it is the superhero, where you think like, oh, Mr. Miracle's somehow in danger, and then you think he dies, and then you find out, oh no, it was just a test dummy, it was just a model. So I'm surprised he didn't do that here, but instead they sort of, tell you, and just from the way it's drawn with, the figure in the foreground and this guy in the background, this is a doll. And so they're testing this thing on the doll. We get some nice little panel-to-panel action here. I like the way he's breathing on his monocle, he's holding this rag, and then he's sort of wiping off his monocle in the next panel. I like those sort of animation-like transitions that Kirby does from time to time. And then he puts the monocle back on, and the device explodes in the face of his assistant. And then we see that, he's behind transparent shielding, and then he comes in, and the Mr. Miracle doll is unharmed. So, Vermin Vundabar is pissed. I can't rise, Excellency. The explosion has severely impaired me. It's just as well, Hydrick. You know the penalty for imperfection. And, Kirby, I'm assuming he's basing the appearance of Vermin Vundabar on Peter Lorre. I mean, maybe there's some other old-time movie guy that he's basing it on, but it seems, that seems to fit. And then we see a gallows humor in this issue, and we see that Vermin Vundabar, kills his underling who's failed him. Mr. Miracle's testing out this new stunt. There's a little bit of exposition about, Scott's life on Apocalypse, and he's loading up the cannon, and then Mr. Miracle's sort of strapped in. And then we cut away to Big Barta, kind of cooling off, down at the river, and behind her, the Granny's pointy-headed troops are showing up in this interesting-looking device, and they're all around her. Again, this is another page where we can see the Royer inks, and then Kirby's original. Yeah, you can see it here. It's very, if you compare these two faces, it's very pronounced. And in this case, I mean, I could see why Jack would be upset about this, because like Royer really puts those eyes far from each other, really, I could see Jack being kind of annoyed with that. And the look on her face is less focused in the Royer version. So I definitely get it. Looks like some of these smaller faces, Kirby didn't bother having him correct, just because they're so small that the changes are hard to perceive. And I mean, Big Barta, she has two amazing costumes. She has sort of her unpowered costume, this sort of cosmic bikini with sort of, little Kirby circuitry hinted at on it. And then she presses the button that causes this like amazing transformation where she gets her like armor. I think, if you're a fan of Jack Kirby, you should check out the Super Sentai series, because they really are, that series really does sort of pick up where Jack Kirby left off, transforming into their sort of armored versions. And I mean, I've always loved this sequence. Her hands are colored, like flesh colored, but it looks like it's drawn to be like gloves. The way Kirby has it drawn, all that squiggling looks like they're actually gloves and should be, blue rather than pink. And so she swings into action. She's jumping away. She's got her mega rod, which allows her to sort of like fly and use it as an attacking weapon. And look, one of these great, Jack Kirby shots of a hero knocking out like a whole battalion. But they have technology that can overtake her, and the weapon drains all of her strength. The energy disperser. Oberon's lighting the fuse on the cannon. Scott Free's doing his thing, and then boom! And looks like Scott got out again, unscathed. Did his escape in record time, and now he sees the ship flying overhead and knows it's trouble. That's an Apocalypse tactical unit in that Magna lift. So he gets his aero pads established in previous issues, so we can just like get to the action very quickly. He hops on, goes to the canyons outside of town, probably modeled after the canyons near where Jack lived, and he finds Vermin Vundabar's death trap. And he's got a little screen telling Scott to come on in, and that this is where Barta is, and he has to consent to be part of this trap. And the trap is a car wash of death. I wonder if that sort of, the sort of classic car wash we think of, if that was like a relatively new thing around this time. I don't know. So I could imagine it sort of capturing Jack's imagination, and the first time he's going through and all the sprays are going and the round, brushes are, buffing the car and whatnot. I'm sure it's sent Jack's imagination going, and like, there's a story here. And so he has this deadly car wash. Immediately, Scott Free gets clamped into this thing and sent through, and it's just a really fun sequence. And he's getting hammered, and then he's getting this nuclear blast going in there, and Vermin Vundabar is watching it, and his lackeys are laughing along. And Barta is still knocked out from that ray. If I could just move one finger, I'd fracture you, Vundabar.
You traitorous! Granny Goodness will deal with you. Meanwhile, an energy disperser stands ready to keep you docile.
Give Scott a chance, Vundabar. I know you'll finish this with some loathsome trick. That's why I deserted Apocalypse. I can no longer soldier in the company of twisted fiends like yourself who worship their power more than Darkseid.
Silence! I want no further blasphemy.
So again, this is that thing I talked about in another episode where Barta is not disillusioned with Darkseid. Darkseid is still a religious figure to her. Darkseid is still someone, she's just, the conditioning was too strong. She's not there yet. She will get there, but she's just not there yet. But what she doesn't like is these people who don't live up to the ideal of Darkseid. She's seeing sort of the, she's fed up with these people who sort of fall short of the Darkseid ideal. Again, very, very interesting.
Great Darkseid rules Apocalypse like a colossus. His is the creed of destruction, not fair play. I accommodate my whims, but I also know that my opponent must be destroyed.
Well then, you and your whims can be consigned to the fire pits. I'll kill you, Vundabar. So Barta is just like, the caged tigress. She's like, the second I get my strength, I am going to, pop your head right off your neck. And then the last part of the car wash, the bath, but it's an acid bath, which melts the whole casket. And they're all laughing about the death of Scott Free, and Scott Free's there laughing with them. I love this moment, just really great. And again, it's this ritual that plays out again and again, where you see the death of scot-free. Scot-free dies and then, is reborn. He rises again. He escapes death and he's, laughing with them. And then they turn around and are shocked that he made it out alive. And now Scott's explaining how he did it. He had these laser boots that cut a hole beneath him that he could sort of jump into instantaneously as the thing moved along the track, and dug a tunnel underneath with the lasers, and now he's here. And then what they don't realize is as he's telling them this story, he's been pacing around them with the laser boots firing and cut a big hole into the ground that they all fell into. Scott, forgive me. I was afraid for us. I, a warrior. You're better than that, Barta. You're a woman. One final blast from Mr. Miracle's shoes carries him and Barta through the wall of the structure. We're out, and my aerodiscs can now take over. And as they leave the scene of their harrowing trial, Vundabar isn't finished with us yet, Scott. It'll take him a long time to crawl out of that pit and longer to make more trouble. A lot of the sort of Apocalypse and New Genesis characters are, fans and students of Earth history. And so Vermin Vundabar was kind of fixated on the Prussian Empire of Earth and sort of modeled himself after that era. And Scott mentions how, Granny gave everybody these like funny names. Vundabar tried to live up to his. He had this sort of German sounding name. And so, studied German history, and that became his identity. Next issue, you know him, I know him. Everybody gets to know a funky Flashman. The question is, do we need him? This can become a desperate issue if a funky Flashman can decide your fate. Watch Mr. Miracle get taken by the con's con man, the funkiest agent of them all. The Funky Flashman issue is, the most controversial issue of Mr. Miracle, maybe the most controversial comic Kirby's ever done. It's also a rip-roaring read. And just one more thing about this. There's a scene with Oberon where Scott tells him that, Oberon comments on the funny names everybody has from Granny Goodness's orphanage. And Scott says, it's like Oliver Twist. He in that story, in that orphanage, they gave the kids these funny names and like Artful Dodger. So it's kind of that thing where Kirby is taking inspiration from another work and then sort of directly addressing it within the comic, making it part of the conversation. Like the characters within that world acknowledge their similarity to another fictional story. So, a fun little bit there. Now we get a bonus. That's one of the good things about these extra length issues is sometimes we get like a bonus story, or sometimes we get a longer main story, and sometimes we get both. And so this is a great one. In the tradition of Oliver Twist and David Copperfield and all the places where the inhuman condition is mother, father, and guiding light, we hereby recount small episodes of Apocalypse in the early life of young Scott Free. And Vinnie Coletta is back as inker. We haven't seen the last of him. Heads up to Darkside, hearts out to Granny Goodness. What else, boys? Tell Granny the rest. The punishment block is the throne of truth. Scott Free must be freed of lies. So Scott Free has made an infraction and is being punished. I'll take your darling demon dogs, Granny. Be careful, dear boy. Their teeth have been newly filed. Report, Scott. I was derelict in duty and a traitor to the tradition. When I was given living specimens for my lesson in prisoner interrogation, I allowed them to overcome me and escape. Lies, lies. The truth is that you're jelly-bellied, weak-kneed, spineless, gutless, and generally soft. Those living specimens populate Apocalypse to breed for Darkside, to work for Darkside, to be killed for Darkside. But they look like us. They're weaponless. They cry under torment. And that's the truth of it. All of my words on this chest recorder have gone unabsorbed, undigested. So yeah, I mean, this is, maybe the fourth story so far where it's referenced, the kind of like torture that is a routine part of Apocalypse life, and that Scott is being, Scott is one of the torturers. He is part of the machine. He's being trained to be part of Darkseid's elite, and part of that is torture. But he couldn't, he he couldn't stomach it, and so he let them get away. He sort of turned aside to let them get away, and he's being punished for that. No, Granny, don't take my recorder. I love your voice. It gives me comfort. You've denied me. You've rejected Granny. On Apocalypse, to disobey a master indoctrinator is close to a capital crime, but Granny chooses to be merciful. To the combat field, march! Run him through the gauntlet 3 times. Our first glimpse of, life in Granny's orphanage, in Granny's world, and it's everyone has a shaved head, this sort of uniformity, this having your identity taken away from you. Like if you had hair, you might it might give you some individuality. You might be able to distinguish yourself as an individual from the pack, but by shaving everyone's head, you're all a nameless cog in Darkseid's machine. And so your fellow students are the ones who administer your punishment, and so he has to run the gauntlet. And as he runs, they kick him, they punch him, and he takes a beating. I mean, look at that face. You don't usually see a superhero taking like that kind of beating and showing that kind of like abuse and damage on his face, and he's thrown into his cell later in a contemplation cell. So again, Orwellian language. This Apocalypse is this sort of nightmare planet, this nightmare fascist state on a planetary scale. You're in here until Granny says you're out, and don't bother the guards by whining. Death to the enemy. And then Scott, says the customary reply, death to New Genesis. So again, he's just taken a beating, but he's still, this is still like the world he's grown up in, and he's still part of it, still able to sort of spout the nonsense. It is then that the solid walls give way to a visitor who conquers barriers. So you're the young one called Scott Free. I didn't know they allowed 2 in a cell. Who are you? I'm Metron, and among other things, I've always wondered about your existence. I've never seen your kind before. You must be one of Darkseid's hierarchy. Metron is hardly that. He's the supreme meddler, the seeker and wielder of cosmic knowledge. His appearance is the beginning of a new dimension to the life of young Scott Free. It's interesting the different lenses, the different viewpoints that we see of the same characters across these different series. That Metron is kind of, like a sneak and, someone not to be trusted, from Orion's perspective. But in Scott Free's life, Metron is sort of, this almost religious figure, this other way, this enlightened one that sits on the throne of heaven, who offers an alternative way of living to the path of Darkseid, the only path that Scott's ever known, and he's this he's like a Yoda to Scott Free, and sort of helps begin his awakening and allow him to to eventually escape Apocalypse. And so we're going to see this story play out in these these backup stories in the next few issues, and then it's going to come to a head and become the main story in Mr. Miracle number 9, where we see Scott Free's ultimate escape from Apocalypse. Just really great stuff, great world building, great myth making, and again, we're reading the books that we're going to be reading. For the next few episodes, we're experiencing the best that Kirby has to offer. It's just really great stuff, and I can't wait to check out some more. Thank you for joining me. I'm Tom Scioli, author of Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics, and I Am Stan, a graphic biography of the legendary Stan Lee. You can find a pre-order link in the show notes below for I Am Stan, and at that same link, you can also pre-order the softcover edition of Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics. I'll see you next time for New Gods Sunday School.